It's great to have you back on Revenge Argon. Now it's time to relax and listen to a gripping revenge story from California. My name is Danielle Pierce. I am 28 years old, and 7 days ago my mom pointed at the front door in the middle of dinner and told me to leave. She said I was wasting my life hiding behind a computer, living in fantasies instead of getting a real job, a real marriage, a real life. My younger sister snorted and called me pathetic, saying I owned nothing, had no ring on my finger, and spent all day glued to a laptop. The wild thing is that laptop they hate quietly pays me $3 million a year, but that night I did not say a word. I pushed my chair back, felt every eye at the table on me, and walked to my room like I was just going to cool off. Instead, I pulled out the small suitcase I had kept half-packed for months and started folding my life into it one careful piece at a time. My mom followed me down the hall, repeating the same lines as always, saying online work is a fantasy and real adults clock in, clock out, and stop dreaming. When she finally said, "If that is your life, go be a failure on the street," something in me clicked. I picked up my laptop, looked her in the eye, and simply answered, "Okay, I hope you remember you said that." Then I walked out of the only house I had ever called home, with a suitcase in my hand and a secret worth millions in my backpack. Before I tell you what happened in the week after that door slammed behind me, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is, because I want to see how far this so-called fantasy is about to travel. The night I left Harbor Point, the sky over the ocean was already black, and the only light on our street came from the porch I had just been kicked off. I tossed my suitcase into the back of my hybrid SUV, set my laptop bag on the passenger seat, and sat there for a second with my hands on the steering wheel, listening to my mom's words still echoing in my head about fantasies and failures on the street. Then I started the car and pulled away from the only driveway I had known my whole life, past the same neighbors who used to tell my parents how responsible I was for babysitting their kids after school. As soon as I hit the main road out of town, my phone buzzed. It was a voice message from Nora, the only person who knew the real numbers behind my so-called fantasy. In the recording, her voice was sharp and calm at the same time. She said, "Danny, breathe. You built an entire education platform from that laptop. Let them think you are a failure for a minute. In 1 week, when the Novasphere Labs partnership goes live, their jaws are going to be on the floor." I played the message twice, then hit call. The freeway opened up in front of me, a long stretch of headlights and taillights between the dark hills and the faint glow of San Francisco on the horizon. Nora answered on FaceTime, her hair up in a messy bun, a mug of tea in her hand in her apartment in Los Angeles. I told her exactly what my mom had said at the table, the way my sister had laughed, the way they looked at my laptop like it was a toy instead of the engine paying for every single bill in my life. Nora shook her head and said, "Your revenge is not yelling back at that table. Your revenge is letting the world see what you built while they are still talking about time cards and overtime." She reminded me that in 7 days, Novasphere would publicly announce that Skillbridge Academy was their official training partner, with my face and name on every press release. She told me to document everything between now and that moment, every call, every doubt, every win, so that when the story came out, it would be complete. "Do not go back there to explain," she said. "Let the announcement explain for you." As the city lights finally came into view and I exited toward my apartment, I realized this was not just a week of damage control. It was the countdown to the moment my parents would be forced to see me exactly as I am. Have you ever driven away from family drama with your whole body shaking, wondering if the people who raised you will only respect you once a stranger with a microphone says you matter? When I pulled into the underground garage of my building in San Francisco that night, the quiet hit me harder than anything my mom had said. No one was waiting at a window to see what time I got home. No one was ready to ask if I had applied for any real jobs that day, It was just concrete, painted lines, and the soft hum of other people's lives behind steel doors. I killed the engine, sat in the dark for a moment with my hands still on the wheel, and watched the reflection of my own face in the windshield. A few hours ago, that face had been sitting at a cheap wooden table in a small coastal town, being told to go be a failure on the street. Now it was back in the city that actually held my whole world. I grabbed my laptop bag like it was non-negotiable, and my suitcase like it was optional, then headed toward the elevator. The building was one of those newer ones tucked into a side street in Soma. Nothing flashy from the outside, but inside everything was clean lines and soft lighting. I swiped my key fob, stepped into the elevator, and watched the numbers climb, while my brain replayed the dinner over and over. By the time the doors slid open on my floor, my jaw was clenched and my shoulders hurt from how hard I was holding myself together. Then I unlocked my front door, pushed it open, and remembered why I had done all of this in the first place. The apartment was not a mansion, but for a girl from Harbor Point it might as well have been. The first thing you see is the desk, not a TV. Dual monitors, a good microphone on an arm, a ring light, my camera, a whiteboard covered in course ideas and launch dates, and right in the middle, the laptop my mom swears is the symbol of my failure. To the left, floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the glow of the city, little squares of light stacked on top of each other, every one of them a separate life. I set my keys in the bowl by the door, kicked off my shoes, and dragged the suitcase just far enough inside to close the door behind me. I did not even bother turning on more lights. The blue from my screens was enough. I went straight to the desk, flipped open the laptop, and felt that familiar rush when everything booted up. This, right here, was the world they refused to see. No time cards, no boss hovering over my shoulder, just dashboards, email threads, student messages, and more responsibility than most people in Harbor Point had ever imagined. For a second, I just stared at the home screen, at the SkillBridge Academy logo in the corner, and I thought, this is the thing they are so afraid of. Then I opened the camera app, clicked to video, and hit record. My own face popped up, lit by the monitor, hair a little messy from the drive, eyes still red from holding back tears I never actually let fall. I took a breath and started talking. Day 1, I said, my voice a little shaky at first. Tonight, my mom kicked me out of her house for living in a fantasy behind this computer. She has no idea that this same computer runs SkillBridge Academy, that we just passed $3 million a year in revenue, and that in 6 days, Novasphere Labs is announcing a partnership with us on a live stream. Saying the numbers out loud in that tiny room I paid for with those numbers felt surreal. I told the camera how I filmed my first course at 22 with a borrowed ring light and a 10-year-old laptop on a stack of shoeboxes. How I shot the lessons in the one corner of my old bedroom that did not show the peeling paint. I talked about working a 9-to-5 I hated, answering customer emails during my lunch breaks, and editing videos at midnight while everyone else in my parents' house was asleep. I remembered the first $50 payout from an online platform and how it felt bigger than a paycheck because it proved someone cared enough to pay for what I knew. When I stopped the recording, the room felt too quiet, so I opened a blank document, switched to the keyboard, and typed a title in all caps at the top of the page. Everything they do not know. Under that, I started a list. The first student who messaged me from a tiny town in the Midwest to say, "Your course helped me land my first freelance client. I can finally quit my second job." The month SkillBridge passed 6 figures for the first time, and I celebrated alone with cheap champagne and takeout on this very couch, while my family thought I was just watching Netflix. The time my parents' power bill was overdue, and the lights were about to be shut off, and I logged onto the utility site, paid it with my business card, and listened the next week as they told someone at church that the company must have fixed a billing mistake. I added the late nights, The refunds I issued to people who could not afford the course but needed it. The scholarships I set up quietly. The guest instructors I convinced to join from 3 different continents. As I typed, my inbox kept pinging. A developer in Austin sent an update on the new student dashboard. An instructional designer in Toronto asked if we could add a module on negotiation for freelancers. An instructor in Manila confirmed filming times that would line up with my morning. While my family sat around a kitchen table in Harbor Point, complaining about people living on their phones, my so-called fantasy was busy paying rent for more than one person in more than one country. I stared at the growing document and realized something I had not put into words before. For years, I had translated my life into a version small enough not to scare them. I told them I did online stuff instead of saying I ran a multi-million-dollar education company. I said I work from my laptop instead of I employ people you will never meet. I pretended it was a phase because that made everyone more comfortable. This week was going to blow that script apart. In 6 days, a company my parents had never heard of would put my name on their website and call me a partner in front of anyone with an internet connection. Whether my family liked it or not, the rest of the world was about to see exactly who I was. And sitting there with the city lights reflecting off the window and my laptop warm under my hands, I had to ask myself the question that had been sitting under everything all along. If the people who raised me refused to even look at the real version of me, do they still deserve to be the first ones I try to impress? The next few days looked exactly like the fantasy my mom thinks is fake, and nothing like the lazy pictures she paints in her head. I was up before sunrise, lacing my sneakers in the building's small gym, jogging on a treadmill while a startup podcast played in my ears about founders scaling from nothing. By 7:30, I was showered, coffee in hand, and at my desk, the blinds open to a slice of the San Francisco skyline. My calendar was stacked. Content review with the curriculum team, product sync with the developers, strategy call with Novasphere's learning director. On one Zoom window, an instructional designer in Texas walked me through a new module. On another, a developer in Poland screen shared a bug fix. Between meetings, I kept glancing at the open document titled Everything They Do Not Know, adding notes about the tiny details my family had never bothered to ask about. Around midday, right as I was preparing for a call with Novasphere's VP, my phone lit up with Mom. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but some part of me wanted to hear which version of me she was talking to now. I answered, and her voice came through flat, like nothing unusual had happened. She did not ask where I was or if I had a place to sleep. Instead, she went straight to, "So, have you come to your senses yet? Or are you still chasing that little fantasy of yours?" I looked at the stack of signed documents on my desk and the Novasphere logo glowing on my second monitor. I said, "I am working, Mom. There is a big announcement coming this week." She laughed under her breath and said, "Well, while you chase that, just so you know, we are canceling the Netflix account you are on. If you want to play grown-up and live on your own, you can start by paying for your own entertainment. We are done funding this phase." She sounded proud of herself, like she was teaching me a hard but necessary lesson. I hung up polite, thanked her for letting me know, then stared at my phone for a beat and actually started to laugh. 5 minutes before that call, I had approved a $50,000 invoice for SkillBridge's new marketing campaign with Novasphere. The gap between what she thought she was cutting off and what I was really doing felt almost surreal. I turned back to my laptop and typed a new line in Everything They Do Not Know. Today, my mom canceled the Netflix profile I barely use, thinking she cut off my safety net, while I quietly fund entire teams and sign contracts she has never heard of. That evening, Nora and I jumped on a late video call to rehearse the talking points for the Novasphere livestream. She coached me through my opener, reminded me to say we instead of I, and to highlight how many students SkillBridge had helped. At one point, she stopped and said, Picture this, Danny. In a few days, you will be on camera, announcing a $3 million a year partnership, and somewhere in Harbor Point, the same people who told you to be a failure on the street will be watching you from their couch. That is the moment this flips. I closed my eyes, imagined my mom in her kitchen with the local news playing, and felt something inside me settle. This was no longer about trying to win her approval. It was about finally living the life I had built without apologizing for it. And whether she believed in it or not, the truth was about to be broadcast louder than her voice had ever been. Exactly 1 week after my mom told me to go be a failure on the street, I was standing under studio lights in a glass conference room at Novasphere Labs with a mic clipped to my blazer and a camera pointed at my face. The backdrop behind me had two logos side by side, Novasphere and Skillbridge Academy, and a production guy was counting down on his fingers, 3, 2, 1, before pointing at me to start. My hands wanted to shake, but after everything that had happened at that dinner table, the nerves felt more like fuel than fear. I smiled into the lens and said, 3 years ago, I was filming courses in a tiny bedroom in a small coastal town, while everyone told me online education was just a phase. Today, Skillbridge Academy is proud to partner with Novasphere Labs to bring practical digital skills to thousands of learners around the world. On the monitor below the camera, I could see the live chat explode with comments and emojis as the host rattled off numbers next to my name. $3 million a year in recurring revenue, over 100,000 students enrolled, a founder under 30 leading a fully remote team. Somewhere between explaining our mission and thanking the early students who took a chance on my first low-budget videos, I realized this was the first time my full story had ever been told out loud, and it was happening in front of strangers before it ever happened in my own family. While all of that streamed out to the internet, back in Harbor Point, my mom was in the kitchen making coffee before her shift at the supermarket, scrolling through Facebook like she always did. A friend had tagged her under a video with the caption, "Is this your daughter?" She clicked, probably expecting some meme or graduation throwback, and instead the clip opened on my face, standing next to a Novasphere executive. The TikTok text overlay said, her mom called her a failure for living in a fantasy behind a laptop. That laptop now makes $3 million a year. At almost the same time, my sister Chloe was throwing on her work polo with the local news playing in the background. The anchor's voice cut through the room. In other news, a young woman from Harbor Point has turned online courses into a multi-million-dollar business. They flashed my photo from the live stream, and the lower third read, founder of Skillbridge Academy, projected revenue, $3 million a year. I did not see their faces in that moment, but I can imagine my mom's jaw tightening. The shock, the immediate rush of anger at seeing our family name attached to a story she could not control, and Chloe freezing in the doorway, realizing the girl she had laughed at across the table was suddenly the woman on TV everyone in town was about to talk about. Back in San Francisco, the live stream wrapped, the crew clapped, and the host shook my hand while my phone buzzed nonstop in my pocket. Texts poured in from students, partners, and a dozen unknown numbers. Nora sent a screenshot of our hometown Facebook group, people already commenting things like, "Did you see what her mom said to her? And guess that fantasy worked out." Standing there with the mic still clipped to my blazer, I thought about how my mother's voice used to be the loudest thing in my life. Now, for the first time, there was something louder. The truth. Broadcast on screens she could not shut off. And if you were in my position, would you answer her call when it finally came through, or let her sit for a while with the reality she tried so hard to deny? The first call from my mom came in less than an hour after the live stream ended, her name lighting up my screen over and over until I finally flipped my phone face down and let it buzz on the conference table. I was still taking photos with the Novasphere team, still answering questions from their comms people, and honestly, I needed a minute where my success was not immediately dragged back into some family crisis. When the calls stopped, a text popped up instead that made my stomach drop for a completely different reason. "We are downstairs. Mom?" I showed it to Nora, who had been hovering nearby like my unofficial bodyguard. She glanced toward the glass lobby and said, "I think I just saw your mother walk past the security desk with someone who looks exactly like you but more annoyed." I took a breath, unclipped the mic from my blazer, and headed to the elevator. In the lobby, under Novasphere's sleek logo, my mom stood stiff in her work jacket, and my sister Chloe hovered beside her in her store uniform, both of them looking wildly out of place among the tech badges and laptops. My mom's eyes swept over the modern furniture, the people in branded hoodies, then landed on me. She did not say hello. She said, $3 million, Danielle. 3 million. You let the whole town find out before your own family. You humiliated us. I felt something in me harden. Out of everything she could have led with, she chose embarrassment over concern. I asked them to come upstairs so we would not be having this conversation in the middle of the lobby, and walked them into an empty glass conference room that looked out over rows of desks and big monitors. I sat at the head of the table, opened my laptop, and without much preamble, pulled up the SkillBridge dashboard. Live user count, monthly revenue, contracts pending with Novasphere. I turned the screen toward them and said, "This is the fantasy you threw out of your house last week." My mom stared at the numbers like they were written in another language. Chloe's eyes widened when she saw the financial graph climb. My mom finally snapped, "Why did you hide this? Why did you make us look like fools?" "We are your parents, Danielle. We had a right to know." I met her eyes and answered, "You had every chance to know, Mom. Every time I tried to tell you about my work, you rolled your eyes or made jokes about me playing on my computer. Last week you told me to go be a failure on the street. That is not what support looks like. That is not what love looks like." Chloe shifted in her seat, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. She said, "I did not think it was real. I thought it was just internet stuff." I watched her face as she remembered laughing in my face at that dinner table. Outside the glass walls, a few Novasphere employees pretended not to look in our direction, and my mom noticed. Her cheeks flushed, not with remorse, but with the horror of being seen like this. She tried to grab control of the narrative again. "We were just trying to push you," she said. "You needed a wake-up call. That is what parents do." I shook my head. Pushing me would have been asking how to help, not telling me I was a disgrace who should live on the street. You do not get to throw me away one week and then show up the next, because the money looks good on television. I told them plainly that if they wanted any relationship with me going forward, it would not be built on guilt, control, or sudden interest in my bank account. It would have to start with respect, with actually listening when I talk about my work, with acknowledging that what they said to me was wrong. My mom opened her mouth like she might finally say, "I am sorry," but what came out instead was, "We did what we had to do. You will understand when you are a parent." I realized in that second that the apology I wanted might never come. I stood up, closed my laptop, and walked to the door. "You told me to go live my fantasy on the street," I said. "I chose to live it here instead. Whether you are part of this reality or not is no longer your decision. It is mine." Then I left them sitting in that glass room, surrounded by the very world they had mocked, while outside, the story they tried to bury kept spreading to people they had never met. In the weeks after that meeting at Novasphere, the story stopped being just mine and turned into something the whole town and half the internet seemed to have an opinion about. In Harbor Point, customers at the supermarket where my mom worked started recognizing her from the comments section, asking careful little questions like, "So, your daughter is that online course girl, right? And guess the laptop thing was not such a fantasy after all." Some were kind, some were not. A few said the quiet part out loud. Things like, "I saw that clip where you told her to go be a failure on the street. That was rough." My mom did what she always does when she feels cornered. She tried to rewrite the story. She told people it was tough love, that she had to push me or I would never have taken life seriously, that parents sometimes have to be the bad guy. Online, though, the narrative did not bend so easily. The segment from the news and a short version of my Novosphere livestream started circulating on TikTok and YouTube. Strangers stitched the video saying, "If your kid is building something on a laptop, maybe ask questions before you throw them out," or "Parents like this should not get front row seats to your success." Meanwhile, Chloe was getting her own crash course in consequences. At the clothing store where she worked, coworkers had watched the viral clip on their lunch break and looked at her differently. One of them joked, "I would not dare talk trash about my sister's job again, just in case she is secretly a millionaire too." It was meant lightly, but Chloe told me later it felt like her cheeks were on fire. For the first time, she was forced to sit in the discomfort I had lived in for years. One night, my phone lit up with her name, and for once, I answered. Her voice was small and raw in a way I had never heard. She said, "I am sorry, Danny. Not the fake kind of sorry. Not the, 'I am sorry you feel that way,' but the real thing. I am sorry I laughed at you. I was jealous, and it was easier to call you delusional than to admit I did not understand what you were doing." I let her talk. Let her own it without jumping in to smooth it over. I told her I appreciated the honesty, that trust would take time, but that I was open to rebuilding something with her, if she could learn to respect my work and my choices even when they did not look familiar. With my mom, it was different. She sent a long email that never actually used the word sorry, just paragraphs about how scared she had been, how the world is dangerous, how nobody in our family has ever had money, and she did not know how to support something she could not control. She blamed the internet, the media, the pressure of looking like a good parent in a small town. I read it twice, then answered with a short response that drew a line. I told her I was willing to have a relationship built on truth, but that truth had to start with her naming what she did to me as wrong. Not a misunderstanding, not just bad wording, but wrong. Until then, I said, space was the healthiest thing for both of us. While all of that played out in the background, SkillBridge kept growing. More students signed up after the Novosphere announcement. Emails from people in tiny towns and big cities hit my inbox, saying things like, "My family thinks learning online is a joke, but your story makes me want to try anyway." When Novosphere invited me to speak on a live webinar about non-traditional careers, I told the edited version of what happened. I did not drag my family by name, but I did say this. I was told that sitting behind a laptop was living in a fantasy. That fantasy paid for my life, my team, and the education of thousands of strangers long before my own family believed it was real. If you are chasing a path that does not look like what your parents imagined, you owe them honesty, but you also owe yourself the chance to see it through. The lesson I kept coming back to, and the one I shared with anyone who would listen, was simple. Success is not supposed to be a weapon you use to hurt people back. It is a mirror that shows you who stood beside you when you had nothing, and who only showed up when the cameras turned on. You are allowed to set boundaries with people who use fear and shame to control you, even if those people share your last name. You are allowed to choose peace over approval. You are allowed to build a life that makes sense to you, even if it looks like a fantasy to everyone else. So if the people closest to you roll their eyes at your goals, if they call your work a joke because it does not fit inside their idea of a real job, ask yourself this. Are you going to spend your life trying to convince them you are worthy? Or are you going to spend it becoming the kind of person who does not need their permission to succeed? And if you were in my shoes, The night my mom told me to take my fantasy to the street? At what point in this story would you have finally walked away? Our team at Revenge Argon is dedicated to crafting powerful, meaningful storylines that are entirely fictional, created solely to share lessons and positive messages with our audience. We are committed to using these imagined scenarios to deliver useful education and valuable knowledge in an engaging way. This script highlights how judgment, pride, and lack of understanding can damage family relationships, while showing the importance of education, self-belief, and setting healthy boundaries. Through the main character's journey, viewers are encouraged to respect different career paths, keep learning, and recognize the value of hard work behind success. It reminds us that true support means listening, learning, and growing together, not controlling or shaming the people we love.